Welcome back to my 20-year GMC Sonoma project, and thank you to all of those that have subscribed. In this episode, I'm going to work on the upper links of the rear four-link suspension, play with some lasers, do some arts and crafts. I hope you enjoy. I'm now at the point of the project that I'm dreading and most excited for at the same time, which is the upper links. And I've been thinking about this design for years, been thinking about how I'm going to assemble it almost every day for the last few months. And what I've decided is I already have an idea of what the bracket's going to be here. I'm lobbing these ears off and putting new brackets on an angle. I actually have them cut up already. And then I'm going to get the bar length and I'll design the brackets that are going to mount to the crossmember once I have that, because then the bar will give me the right idea of the position, and I have a bit of room that I can move. But I want to make sure that I measure the bar length correctly. And what I've done is I have the T-square lined up right here where the bracket, this old ear, meets the differential bracket, and then along here to the crossmember where I believe the bracket's going to meet. And I've laid this out a few ways. One is I had a laser level going along the center of the lower mount, because the center of the lower mount is going to match the center of the upper mount. And so I marked that off here, and knowing that the upper bar width is going to be 1.5 inches, I went 7/8 outwards to get the outer portion of the bracket, since this is the outer portion back here. Secondly is I have a laser pointed to the center of the lower bracket going transversely, and that's going to mark off here where the center, or where the bolt is going to be going on the upper mount. Now there is a bit of an angle, but that's okay because this is on an angle and this is on the outside. So when I measure it up roughly from here to the mark, I'm getting about 31.25. But I realized that I had designed this to stick out a little bit further, to stick out so it's centered. The center of the mount is centered to the axle itself. So, this is very rough. I'm kind of eyeing where the center is, roughly kind of putting it where I think it was, and I'm getting about 30.5, 30.25. So I know that's about the range. If I get adjustable arms, then that'll give me the ability to get into the right position. Secondly is the angle. So I need to figure out the angle of the bar, making sure that I have it right so that that measurement is correct. And here, when I measure it off, I'm getting 15 degrees. Now, a couple things. When I did math and with trigonometry and all the data that I had, or calculations that I had, it was going to be 18.5 degrees. So it's off a little bit. It's off by 3.5 degrees. And then here where I moved it, this is not necessarily going to be the outside. I figured that afterwards and before I started recording. So I believe I'm gonna have to move this out a little bit more, which will give me a couple more degrees. So I know visually it's a little bit hard to understand, so let me kind of start working on it, and then you will start to see everything come together. So now that I know roughly that the upper links are going to be 30.5 inches plus or minus half an inch, I can start working on the tabs. And by doing this, I could also verify that it is at 30.5 inches is the right length for those upper arms. So the first thing I need to do is lob these off, and I'll do one side at a time, just in case. It gives me a reference point if I need it. And then I need to at least put one of the tabs in. This will need to be at an 18-degree angle. I know I measured 15, but my calculations were saying around 18, so I want to start with that. And the way I'm going to make sure that it's in the right position is I'm going to create, using some 1/4-inch steel that I have scrap, cut that at an 18-degree angle, weld it to this, and then I could either weld or with a magnet hold it up to the back end here. That'll allow me to get the right angle, then I could tack weld it, and from there I could do another measurement from the center bolt here to my marking on the cross member and double check that everything is around the 30.5 inch for the upper link. I use a cutoff wheel to get through the tabs and hammer them off. To clean it up, I start with the flap disc to remove the tab remains. This wasn't easy and took a lot longer than I anticipated. I then switched to a wire brush to remove the paint, which was very stubborn, so I think this piece was actually powder coated. I marked off 18 degrees and rough cut it with the cutoff wheel. Then I roughly sanded it with the flap disc, and I fine-tuned it on the disc sander, part not pictured here. After a bit of sanding, it came out to the exact angle I needed. With my basic angle jig, I have the shorter upper length attached to it because that's going to be on the outside. The longer link is going to come over here. Because of the angle, it's going to be away from the differential. I have it mounted here with a square magnet, and the next step I want to do is actually tack weld it so that I don't have to worry about this shifting as I'm carrying it over to the differential bracket. Then when it's on there, I may tack this part to the mount, or I might just use a magnet. I'll see how much it shifts and moves. But my ultimate goal is to then tack this onto the differential mount, and then I can cut off the tack welds from the tab to this little jig. So I'm just going to use the MIG welder just because it's quick and easy, and I'm actually going to tack it on this side because once it's mounted, it'll be easier for me to cut it off. And the goal is then to reuse this for the other side, but it'll be flipped that way. Sorry about the bad camera angle. After a few tacks, it was ready to move it to the diff bracket. It took me a little bit, but I have everything in the spot that I think it should be. So I lined up the top of this mount, and I know it's hard to see with this cross member, but I lined it up to where the top of the old mount was, and roughly, and what I'm using the straight edge for is it's roughly a 1/4 inch from the bottom of the straight edge to the top of my angle jig. Everything's held in place with the magnet, and everything's butted against everything. What I have noticed is two things. One, I didn't really clean up the sides at all, so I need to go back and clean that before I do any welding. And second, because as this extends further, this part of the mount is flat, but the bottom part is angled. So the further you stick out, that longer that angle starts to dip down, and it's lower than the original mount. So I also have some cleanup below here that I need to get off, either if it's paint or powder coating, off of the differential mount so I could have a proper weld. So while it's in place and I want to weld it now, just at least tack it in to get in place, I know this right thing to do is actually take it off, clean it up properly, then put it back on, then I can tack it into place. I started with roll-lock discs that were 60 and 80 grit, but that coating was still stubborn. Switched to a small wire brush on a die grinder, and that didn't cut it either. went for a wire wheel on the angle grinder. While it worked, it was still tough and was a slow process. Now it's time to tack the tab to the diff mount. Sorry again for the bad camera angle. To mock up both tabs, I used some scrap tube that was large enough to fit a bolt through to act as a spacer. The bushings I'm using will be 1 3/4 inch wide, so that's the length the tube needs to be. And I used some calipers to help me mark it in a few places at that length. Using a piece of Bristol board, I wrapped it around so I can mark it off with a continuous circle. I then cut it off with the cutoff wheel. And finish it off with a disc sander. So I have this up roughly, and just seeing it gives me a little bit of a wave of relief, because I've been visualizing this for months, and actually seeing it actually come together is quite amazing. The longer piece is a little bit off, but you know, just with a little bit of pressure here, I think I could get it in where there's very little gap and tack that in. So it's not tacked in yet. So, you know, angle's a little bit off, but that's minor. That's absolutely minor. So now that I have this mocked up, I can double check, or actually triple check, the length of the upper arm, just to make sure that it is still in the 30.5 plus or minus half an inch. And if I'm good there, then I know that's the length that I need to order for the upper bars. So I set up everything how I had it before, and let's check it. I haven't actually checked the measurement. So I'm hoping that's the good news, because there is something that I see that will make me have to make a little bit of adjustments. But now's the time to do that. So rough centered here to here. It's actually giving me 31. Okay, so a little longer than I anticipated. You know, maybe closer to 30 3/4. So I'll have to, you know, look at that again. Maybe go for a little bit longer arms by 1/4 inch, just to make sure. And again, as long as I have enough play in the adjustment, it should be fine. The other thing I can do is adjust the bracket. This isn't built yet. So if I have to come a little bit more this way, that's not a big deal. Now, the thing that I've noticed is over here. Laying this, so I'm parallel with this. Now it's going to move, it's going to tweak a little bit once I get this longer tab in place, because I know it's off a little bit, but it's not going to adjust that much. But coming here, the tab is getting really close to this weld, and underneath it's actually closer to the center. So it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for me to build a tab. So what I think I need to do is just move everything by maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. And I think 1/2 inch should be fine. Yeah, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. I'll have to figure that out. And then that'll give me a good spot for the bracket. Now, I do want as close to here as possible, but at the same time, I need enough meat at the bottom that I can actually put the bottom of the bracket on, because in my mind, think of it as like a fork that's going to go over the top and the bottom, so then I have 3 areas to weld the tabs to. Good thing I'm doing this now. I can make some adjustments. So a little bit more work, but that's okay. After doing some thinking, I've decided I'm going to redo this angle to be at 15 degrees rather than 18. I could probably make it work as it is now. It'll be close to the edge, but I wouldn't be happy with it. I'd like it to be in the center of this section here, which means I gotta do 2 things. One is that angle jig that's set at 18. It's going to be a little bit harder to go back to 15. I really should have just cut it at 15, test it, and if I needed to cut a little bit more, I could get it to 18. I'll just have to cut it on both sides rather than one side of the angle. And secondly, the other piece, I'm gonna have to cut that back a little bit. So there's gonna be a little bit of massaging so that when it's at 15 degrees, the other tab is still parallel. And looking at the tabs, over here, the distance is where it needs to be, 1 3/4, because I have the spacer here at that amount. And as you go back, it actually extends out a 32nd, and that's because I haven't adjusted this tab, this longer tab yet. So it is pushing out a bit on that angle. So it's not much. When I take this off before I fully weld it, I might just sand it down a little bit. But my next step now is to work on the driver's side, cut off the old tabs, tack in the shorter of the new tabs, and just make sure everything lines up similarly as it would extend out to the cross member. So I have this part cleaned up, and I have to say, grinding sucks. Just the angle I was at, the sparks were flying up and onto my head. So getting, little burns, so that slowed me down. And then I just had grinding dust everywhere. It was just all over me. So painful and just all over. And I've had grinding dust get in my eye, so I just hate it when it's all over the place. So if there's anybody out there that loves grinding, please let me know, because I'm looking forward to not doing any more heavy grinding on this project. I've done a lot of grinding already. Anyway, I do have the other tab put in. I've been doing a little bit of measurements on both sides, doing some tweaks. I have to continue to do some tweaks. It's getting close. Not quite there, but getting close. So I'll continue to do that off camera, and then I'll come back when I actually have an idea for the front tabs that are going to go on the cross member. I used the same process when I was doing a rough estimate of the size of the arm by using the laser level on the lower link bolt centered there, and having that T-square to give me a rough idea of where the bracket would be. Measured that off from the bar, the cross member, to the hole, and did some trigonometry to figure out what's the difference in terms of size, and it's just under a 1/2 inch difference. I think it's like 0.4 something. So with that, I was able to make these up. With the lower tab templates in place, I can now measure the length of the upper arm. And what I've done here is on each of these bolts, I found the center and marked it. So I'll be going center line to center line with the same thickness out. To make my life easier with this little tab, I'm gonna actually start on 1 inch. So whatever my measurement is, I'm gonna remove 1 inch from that. And so then that looks like 31 1/8 minus 1, so 30 1/8. So it is shorter than my original calculations. I think that's just because of the angle. The more, if I was back at the 18.5, it would make it longer, but this is fine. Now I know what it is, and my next step is just double check the other side. I might have to make some tweaks, but if I could get it around the same 30 1/8, then I know that's what I need to order. I went ahead and checked the other side. So I just used the same templates, flipped them around, and it's in and around the same. So 30 inches and 1/8. It was actually like a 32 shorter, but this is also hanging down a little bit more, so it's gonna be fine. 30 1/8 is what I need. It's going to work out perfectly. Now next steps is I need to order the arms. I don't know how long they're going to take. So, and here's the problem. I want to get the arms. I'm going to then test fit again with the templates just to make sure before I order these to be water jet cut. That will only take a day or two once I know that. So while I wait for the arms, what do I do? One is I could probably take this off because I have the cross member here and here, so it's fine now. I think I might test fit the cab, but I got to think about it. So if in the next scene I'm doing my outro, it's because the arms are going to take too long. I want to finish up the video and I'm going to start with something else. Or in the next scene, you're going to see me actually start to install arms or bars. Let's see. I threw in that bonus scene, but we are now at the outro, which means I don't have the upper links. I've placed the order, they're being worked on, it's just going to take time, which means I don't know when my next video is going to be. I thought about testing the cab, and to do that safely here, I'd have to take out the engine, and which means that when I do the travel test, I won't have the drive shaft in to double check the binding, if there's going to be any binding. The other thing is, there is some work on the front of the frame that I have to do with the engine out. So it's just going to delay me even further to finish the rear suspension. The other option is to bring this all out so I have more headroom to put the cab over the engine, but the differential is sitting now on a block at the right angle and I can't roll it out like that. So everything's pointing me back to just finish the rear suspension. I'll have a look to see if there's any other work or small projects that I could do and film and put it in between, but it might just be I have to wait, get the upper links, finish that up, and then have my next video out. If you enjoyed watching, please like, subscribe, and comment. It does give me motivation to keep on going. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.